To Meet the Press now, I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, closing out a wild week for the White House as parts of President Trump's agenda were derailed and in some cases re-railed, with Republicans on Capitol Hill battling internal divisions in the Senate, and they basically lost control of the agenda in the House to Democrats, raising questions about how far Congress is willing to go to act as a check on the president with less than 5 months to the midterms. Right now, President Trump is in battleground Wisconsin, where he's set to participate in a roundtable discussion that's focused on agriculture. It's also where he's sitting down with Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker for an exclusive interview for the show on Sunday. We'll have more on that in a moment. The president coming off a legislative win last night in the Senate, where Republicans passing the $70 billion fund to fund ICE and Border Patrol without any definitive guardrails to assure the Justice Department follows through on its promise to abandon the president's so-called anti-weaponization fund. Now, after that vote, Republican Majority Leader John Thune explaining why none of the attempts to include that language in the final legislation were successful.
What happened with these attempts to try to add amendments related to the weaponization fund? Why do you think none of them ended up being successful?
Well, we didn't have the votes. So, I mean, I think our folks understood what the mission was, and that was to get those two bills across the finish line and fund the border and law enforcement, and that everything else was a distraction.
Still, the weight of all the Republican pushback this week against the weaponization fund, the war in Iran, and the president's handling of the war in Ukraine is raising questions about how far some Republicans are willing to go to cross the administration. And looming on the congressional schedule is the confirmation of acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who will likely still face heat from Republicans about the anti-weaponization fund. President Trump also needs Congress to pass reauthorization of a key surveillance tool after he appointed a fierce loyalist, Bill Pulte, to the top intel job. Now, Pulte's appointment is already facing outrage from both sides of the aisle, and President Trump adding fuel to the fire today, confirming reports that he told Pulte to fire staff within the office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Why do you want Bill Pulte to cut the office of the Director of National Intelligence, and how long is he going to be in that role?
Depends on how long it takes to get somebody approved. He'll do a very good job. He'll watch it closely, but Bill Pulte is very good. He's very talented.
You want to cut the number of people working there?
I wouldn't mind. I've heard that's way too high for way too long. Yeah, I wouldn't mind. If he cut, I wouldn't mind that.
Who are the people you're talking to for D&I? Can you give us some names?
5 different people. All very good, all people that you know very well, all people that do that kind of thing, and they're very respected people.
Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who's traveling with the president in Wisconsin and where the president is set to speak. With me on set is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona. All right, Gabe, let's go to you first. We did hear from the president on his way to Wisconsin, and again when he got off the plane. What else did he say, and what kind of message can we expect from the president when he speaks behind you there in Wisconsin?
Well, Ryan, certainly this is a very competitive House district ahead of the midterms, one of the most competitive really across the country, and Republicans they feel they need to hold on to this seat, and that's part of the reason why the president is coming here today. He'll be speaking to farmers in this area just outside of Eau Claire, and the message we expect from him, Ryan, is to talk about the economy. Already, the president, in both opportunities, he's had to speak with reporters today aboard Air Force One, and also when he got off the plane, he has been touting those economic numbers, those stronger than expected job numbers that we heard about this morning. Also touting how gas prices have come down over the last several weeks, some 30 cents or so. However, the stock market, the Dow Jones took quite a hit today over fears over inflation, and that is something that the president and his administration feel that they need to try and sell the Iran war to the American people. So we expect to hear more from the president on that topic. Aboard Air Force One, you mentioned some of the things he talked about. He dismissed any concerns about Bill Pulte, his selection for acting DNI, and he also lashed out against Republicans like Tom Tillis, who are skeptical of Pulte's appointment, calling Tillis a very angry man. So certainly the president not backing down, even as he sees that increasing skepticism from some Republicans in the Senate, Ryan.
Yeah, and Gabe, you mentioned it being one of the most competitive congressional districts in the country. We see Derek Van Orden, who is the congressman at risk there in that district, speaking to this crowd, riling them up. Let's talk about how the White House is feeling about the Senate passing that reconciliation bill last night without any language about the anti-weaponization fund. Is there still a chance? Is there an opening for this fund to come back at some point?
Well, look, at this point, you talk to White House officials, they not really talking about bringing this fund back, but you do hear the president himself kind of stoking those concerns among some congressional Republicans and, of course, Democrats. And every time he's asked about it, he says he loves the idea of this weaponization fund, seeming to go against his very own acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, who told congressional leaders in no uncertain terms that this weaponization fund was, in fact, dead on arrival. Still, the president has been coming back and saying that he loves it and that he didn't back down because of congressional pressure, but only because a judge ruled against it, although a judge didn't really rule against it, just issued a temporary pause at this point. But so far from what we heard from the White House officials, no, they're not thinking that this weaponization fund will come back in any real form, at least for now, Ryan.
And you mentioned that the president is standing by Bill Pulte. But he also confirmed that he wants to act on Pulte's slashing staff. Is the White House at all concerned about other legislative priorities like FISA that could be at risk with Pulte's appointment and then any subsequent firings at the DNI's office?
Well, look, I just heard from a White House official on that topic, and their response is essentially to blame Democrats for any pushback they might get on FISA. They are trying to sell the Pulte nomination as best they could, trying to argue that he does have relevant experience. The president saying that he oversaw Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and so that somehow qualifies him to be acting DNI, although there is huge skepticism, as you know, Ryan, on the Hill, that he's any relevant national security background. But we did hear from the president when he was asked directly about this aboard Air Force One a short time ago that he wouldn't mind if Bill Pulte went ahead and slashed jobs in the intelligence community. So at this point, though, the White House doesn't think that will hold up FISA, and they're tacked on this. What they plan to do is really hit Democrats hard if there is any pushback on FISA at this point, Ryan.
Okay, Gabe Gutierrez, keep an eye on that in Wisconsin for us. We appreciate it. Let's bring Mel into the conversation now. And I want to pick up where Gabe left off there. Democrats, the White House blaming Democrats for the reason that FISA isn't being passed, but they have a real problem with Republicans right now on Capitol Hill. What's the mood like? We're certainly starting to see some of them push back a little bit, but as we saw last night, they ultimately fell in line. What's the next 6 months going to be like for Republicans?
I feel like it's going to be very difficult still for the next 6 months. Yes, the YOLO caucus did fall in line. They ultimately did not add any amendments that would have really rebuked Trump. But they are starting to light some fires. They're not burning the whole House down. But let's not lose sight of the big picture here. It was the pressure from Republicans that led GOP leadership to ultimately drop ballroom funding from the reconciliation package. They also had a lot to do with the fact that the DOJ announced they would be abandoning that anti-weaponization fund. Now, of course, we'll see whether that comes back now that there is no legislative binding to prevent the administration from resurrecting that fund. But I do think that some of these Republicans are really starting to use their voice, and we're going to see a lot more of that as we get closer to November.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between passing something they wanted to pass anyway, as opposed to passing something with a bunch of stuff in it that the president wanted that they didn't necessarily want. We did hear from Senator Murkowski last night. She seemed to keep the door open to this idea that they might actually pass something that would prevent the weaponization fund from actually being implemented. Is that realistic at this point?
I'm still skeptical. There are certainly other Republicans who support that, who are concerned about the weaponization fund. You see that in Tom Tillis, Bill Cassidy, John Husted, Dan Sullivan, some of these members in really tough races. But as you know, on Capitol Hill, it's just very difficult to go through the normal legislative process to pass these bills if you don't have a majority of the majority's support, which is, at least right now, not what we're seeing. And so I think yesterday was probably their best opportunity to be able to pass legislation. That being said, I don't think it's an issue that's necessarily going away anytime soon.
And let's talk about some of the things that are on the horizon. They've got to confirm Todd Blanche as the next attorney general. That necessarily won't be easy. They also have to renew this FISA Section 702. Given what we saw, how difficult could both of those things be?
I think they're going to be even more difficult than reconciliation. Reconciliation had the benefit of the fact that underlying all of it was this immigration bill that had a lot of support among Republicans. When it comes to both Todd Blanche as well as FISA, we're already seeing members come out expressing their concerns. Tom Tillis, he's a key member of the Judiciary Committee. He has already come out and said he has concerns about Todd Blanche as the permanent nominee. And then when it comes to FISA, Democrats, they're needed here because Republicans can't agree amongst themselves on FISA. So they have come out and said they're going to vote against this bipartisan deal if Pulte is still in the acting position. So there is a huge mess awaiting us and everyone else as we get back to Capitol Hill next week.
Yeah, probably the next 6 months is going to be a bit like this. All right, Melanie, Zanona, thank you for that as always. Let's turn now to the economy and a labor market that is proving itself to be rather resilient despite the effects of rising costs from the war against Iran and high anxiety from consumers. The Labor Department reporting today that the economy created 172,000 new jobs last month. That was well above expectations. It's the third straight month the labor market has grown by more than 170,000 jobs. The unemployment rate holding steady at 4.3%. The White House today touting those numbers.
I think that basically what we're seeing is an enormous amount of positive momentum in hiring. Obviously, you're right that a couple of 170s in a row, that's a great couple of months, but then having upward divisions of around 100,000 means that this is a job market that's hitting on all cylinders. And it's our belief that this is happening because of all of the supply side policies that the president has put in place.
Now, today's news coming less than a month after the Labor Department reported that inflation in April hit 3.8%, its highest level in 3 years. And as the average price for a gallon of gas remains above $4.20 a gallon, that's according to AAA, up more than 40% since the start of the war with Iran. It was a brutal day on Wall Street, despite that jobs report. All three major indices down on the day. The NASDAQ tumbling more than 4%. President Trump posting on social media, with a great jobs report like just announced, stocks should go up, not down. That's the way it was for 200 years. Growth does not mean inflation. NBC News chief business correspondent Christine Romans joins me now. The president apparently trying to will the market in his direction. But we did get a wild day on Wall Street. And let's start with the May jobs numbers, though. Break down today's report. What does it tell us?
You know, this is a show that is watched by people who watch and follow politics. So let me put it in the political context here. The last 3 months of job creation were the best 3 months for jobs since Joe Biden was president. So look at that. Last year was not a great year for job creation. This shows you 3 strong months here. You saw Kevin Hassett say firing on all cylinders. A few things happening here. You've got tax benefits in the big, beautiful bill. That's helping companies. They are through the tariff uncertainty of last year. And in fact, many companies are getting millions of dollars back in tariff refunds and an economy that has just been resilient. And we saw this at the end of the Biden administration as well. No matter what kind of hit the economy took, it kept moving forward. You're seeing that, by the way, voters didn't believe that and voted Democrats out. But now you have kind of a similar situation. The jobless rate, 4.3%. That is enviable. And then here's the rub. You mentioned that 3.8% unemployment rate, or 3.8% inflation rate and 3.4% wages. This is purchasing power that is diminishing a little bit. Another reason why the consumer sentiment numbers are just so bad, Ryan.
And so let's turn now to this tumultuous day for the markets, especially the NASDAQ. Explain to us what happened.
So a couple of things here, but most importantly, they saw that strong labor number, those 3 strong months in a row and a 4.3% jobless rate. And remember, a lot of folks have been penciling in rate cuts to support the job market. This is not a job market that needs to be supported. So a lot of people thinking here the next move could be a rate hike, and higher interest rates, of course, hurt very fast growing industries like tech, companies that take on a lot of debt. So that's why you're seeing that part of the market really move lower. That's an ugly number, by the way. A one-day move of 4%. That's a big move, Ryan. You haven't seen anything like that since, I think, April of last year. That was that Liberation Day tariffs when the markets just fell out of bed.
Mm-hmm. And as your numbers show us, inflation is up, consumer sentiment is down, but the labor market is resilient. How do you square those different numbers that seem to tell us different things?
Because companies are powering ahead here, and they're hiring people still. And one thing that is interesting to me about this number in particular, it means they're hiring, but they're not having to pay up for workers. So a couple of reasons there, probably AI. They're probably, the job market just isn't as gangbusters as it was maybe in 2024 when we were worried about it being too hot. It's good. It's good. It's very good. But it's not so good that it means wages have to rise faster than inflation. By the way, we're going to get another inflation report, I think, next week. And gosh, there are a lot of people I talk to think you could see a number more like 4% on inflation. So watch this space. This is the part of the economy that people are screaming about, the affordability part of the economy. Prices still rising. Gas prices have improved a little bit over the past few days. Hopefully they will in the days ahead as well, because oil prices fall today. But still, gas was $2.98 before the war began 4 months ago, $4.22 today. That's a big difference for family budgets and for business budgets. So that's still a drag on the economy.
Okay, Christine Romans, thanks for breaking it down for us. We appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.